Good morning. We're in Maseches Shekalim, Perek Daled, Mishnah Ches. We mentioned we learned last week Mishnah Hey, Vav, and Zayin of Perek Daled. They're not directly related to the topic of Maktas HaShekel, which is really the subject of the Masechta. They deal with if a person makes his belongings hektish, and there may be some ketores, the ingredients for ketores amongst his items. There may be animals that you can bring as a korban amongst his items. And we learned about what you do with these items that he declared are hektish. Do these things go to bedek habayis? Remember, we learned there are two types of hektish. One is hektish for bedek habayis, which means hektish for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. And another hektish is lemizbeach, for karbanis. So when a person is very clear with what he means and he expresses it, we have no problem. A person can say, this car is bedek habayis, and that's what it's going to be, because you can't bring a car to the mizbeach. The car is going to go to the gizbar. The gizbar is going to sell it, and they're going to use the money for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Straightforward case. Someone says this animal is going to be a korban ola, my private korban ola, or my shlomim, or my toda. No problem. It's kadshe mizbeach, very clear. But what happens when someone says, this is hegdish, and it could be it's an animal. He just says hegdish, or in a more complicated case, says everything that I own is hegdish, and there's the car and the computer and the jewelry and the clothing and the furniture and a couple of animals that can be brought as a korban. What do you do? So this is the classic machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer holds stam kodshim ala bedek habayis. When someone says this will be hegdish and doesn't explain, the assumption is he wants it to go for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, the items need to be sold, and the proceeds will be used for the Beis Hamikdash upkeep. Rabbi Yoshua says stam kodshim ala mizbeach. When someone says that his items should be hektish, anything that can be brought as a korban shall be brought as a korban, because hektish means korban. Obviously, if amongst his items there's a Chevy, it's not going to be a korban. That will be sold, and as we learned last week, that will be sold, and the proceeds will go to the bedek habayis. Without relearning the Mishnayos we learned last week, those are the two basic shitos. Stam kodesh lebedek habayis. If you don't express yourself and you say hegdish, it's for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Eliezer, and I'm emphasizing Eliezer because today we're going to learn a Mishnah about Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Eliezer says stam kodesh is lebedek habayis. Rabbi Yeshua says stam hegdish is le mizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer has a little twist to his sheet. Rabbi Eliezer, we learned last week, says if a person says everything I own is hegdish, he means everything he owns should become proceeds to be used for the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, everything needs to be sold, and the proceeds will go to the Beis Hamikdash. The Chevy, furniture, jewelry, everything's going to be sold, proceeds to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. However, Rabbi Eliezer says, if amongst the possessions there are animals that can be used for a korban, then Rabbi Eliezer says you sell, because the money's got to go to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, because hektish means to the bedek habayis. But if there are animals that can be brought as korbanos, we're going to take male animals and sell them to people who need a korban ola. The proceeds will go to bedek habayis, and the animal will go to the purchaser's korban ola. If there are female animals, the animals will be sold to a person who needs to bring a shlomim. And this way, the carbon will be the purchasers for a shlomim, proceeds to Bedek Habayis. So Rebbe Eliezer has this little twist. While all proceeds go to the Beis Hamikdash, in other words, if Rebbe Eliezer were just a straight Bedek Habayis, then one would say, sell everything, the car, the furniture, the jewelry, the clothing, the animals, sell everything to whoever wants it. The money goes to the Bedek Habayis, even the animals. And if somebody wants to buy the animals and use it as, he wants to take the animal home and shecht it for supper, that's fine also. Rebbe Eliezer says, no. That's not fine. I do want all the proceeds to go to the Beis Hamikdash, and everything's going to be sold. However, animals that can be brought as a carbon shall be brought as a carbon. And the way you do that is by selling the animals to someone else who need male animals. Someone needs an ola. So the animal will end up a carbon. The female animals will end up a shlomim. All the proceeds are going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. But the animals that can be a carbon will in fact be a carbon. So Reuven says, everything I own is hektish. The car, everything, the furniture is going to be sold, proceeds to the Beis Hamikdash. Theoretically, if you follow this shita consistently, any animals that Reuven had should be sold, and the purchasers of these animals should be able to shecht them and make a barbecue. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you're going to sell the animals. The proceeds are going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. Reuven will get credit for giving such a huge donation of money to the Beis Hamikdash. The animals will be sold for karbanos, and the people who buy them will get credit for bringing the carbon. They're not Reuven's karbanos. Reuven gave money to the Beis Hamikdash. So that's the little twist in Rabbi Eliezer. Everything sold, all proceeds go to the Beis Hamikdash. However, the sale of animals is not a free-for-all sale where the purchaser can do whatever he wants with the animals. The purchaser is going to use these animals for a carbon. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua said that he holds stam kachim are le-mizbeach. They all should be brought to the mizbeach. So when Reuven says, everything I own is kodesh, we understand that the Chevy and the furniture, the clothing and the jewelry can't be kachei mizbeach. So clearly he wants that sold and the money goes to the Bedek Habayis. However, any animals he has that can be brought as a carbon are not going to be sold and proceeds to the Beis Hamikdash like Rebbe Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua holds you're going to take the male animals that Reuven had and you're going to bring them as a carbon on behalf of Reuven as an ola. Any female animals that Reuven had that are kosher l'mizbeach, you're going to sell those animals, and then you're going to buy male animals and bring those animals also as a carbon ola on behalf of Reuven. Why? Because Rabbi Yeshua holds when a person says, hekdish, I want this to be holy, and there are animals that can be brought as a carbon, not only does Rabbi Yeshua hold that the word hekdish means for the Mizbeach, the word hekdish without any additional explanation, hekdish for shlomim, hekdish for Toda. Hekdish means I want it holy, means holy for God. I want this to be completely for God, and that's a carbon ola where everything is consumed. The owner, the Kohen, no one eats any part of it. The Kohanim get the hide of the ola, but other than that, it's kuloi lashem, all for God. And that's Rabbi Yeshua's understanding of the interpretation of a man's intention when he says hekdish. So that's the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Akiva told us that he feels, in his opinion, that Rabbi Eliezer is more, shall we say, more reasonable, because Rabbi Eliezer is consistent. Rabbi Eliezer says, when Reuven says everything is hektish, it means all the money. It's all about money. Money is going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. You're going to sell the car, the furniture, you're going to sell the animals. All the money's going for the Beis Hamikdash. On the other hand, so it's consistent. How am I interpreting Reuven's words? Reuven said Hekdesh, and I'm giving all the money to the Beis Hamikdash. Consistent. On the other hand, Rabbi Yeshua says, Reuven said Hekdesh, I'm going to sell the furniture, the clothing, and the jewelry and give the money to the Beis Hamikdash. Oh, but the animals I'm not selling and giving the money to the Beis Hamikdash. The animals I'm going to bring as a carbon. So Rabbi Eliezer says some of this is going to go for money and some of this is going to go for carbon. Rabbi Akiva says, I see Rabbi Eliezer is making more sense to me. Therefore, we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. We paskin that stam kachim go to bedek habayis. When someone says everything I own is hekdesh, you're going to sell it, and the money's going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. If there are animals that can be brought as a carbon, they will be sold, and the money goes to the Beis Hamikdash. But the male animals will be sold to other people who need a carbon ola, and the female animals will be sold to other people who need a carbon shlomim. That's how we pass. Now we're up to Mishnah Ches, Perek Daled Mishnah Ches, and this Mishnah, the way we're going to learn it, is a Mishnah that's not according to halacha, because this Mishnah seems to agree with Rabbi Yehoshua in the previous Mishnah. And we learned that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yeshua. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. And in this Mishnah, we're going to get the shita, the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar will hold like Rabbi Yeshua. Neither of them are lefi halacha. Halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. Somebody raised this last week in one of the questions that came up. Somebody raised the question, well, what do you do if someone makes everything he owns hekdesh, and amongst the things that he made hekdesh, there's oil, there's wine, there's flour that can possibly be used as flour offerings and wine offerings, or they call it libations, on the Mizbeach, or there are birds, pigeons, b'nei Yonah, that can be used also as a carbon for certain things. Ophos are kosher for certain carbonos. So this is a new case. Reuven says everything else is hekdesh, and there's flour, wine, oil, pigeons. These too can be used for the mizbeach. What do we do with these things? Let's stop. What would Rabbi Eliezer tell us to do with these things? Rabbi Eliezer probably would say to us, everything the man owns, the furniture, the jewelry, the car, everything gets sold and goes to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Wine, oil, birds that can be used as a carbon, Rabbi Eliezer may say, sell it and take the proceeds of the sale, give it to the Beis Hamikdash for the upkeep, and sell these things to people who may need wine, oil, or birds for a carbon. That's what Rabbi Eliezer would probably tell us to do in this case. However, Rabbi Elazar says, Yimachru letzorchei osa hamin v'yaviu b'dmeim olos. Rabbi Elazar says, sell these things, sell the wine, sell the oil, sell the birds, for someone who needs wine. Someone needs wine to bring with his private carbon, or someone wants to donate mincha nesachim for the mizbeach, or someone needs flour oil offering. Somebody needs birds when you need a bird offering. You sell it to these people. That's what Rabbi Eliezer would say. But what would Rabbi Eliezer do with the proceeds? He would give it for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. He says, Rebbe Elazar, v'yavi b'dmeim olos, the money, the proceeds of the sale, you buy male animals and you bring them as an ola. Whose sheet is that from the last Mishnah? That's Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says you take the proceeds of these kind of things, you buy an ola, because when a person says hekdesh, he means he wants it to be brought on the mizbeach. And since he said the word hekdesh, he means the holy carbon ola. So we're going to take the oil, We're going to take his car and furniture and stuff and sell and give it to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. But we're going to take the oil, the flour, and the wine. We're going to sell it to those people who need these things to bring to the Mizbeach. The proceeds are going to be used to buy male animals that bring a korban olah. This is exactly Rabbi Yoshua of the last Mishnah, who we don't paskin like. So if you take a look in Rabbeinu Avad Mibar Tanura, on the right side of your page at the top, third line down, Rebbe El-Ozer Garcinon. The Rav points out to be careful here. This Mishnah Ches is Rebbe El-Ozer. That's what you should have in your Mishnah. Velo Rebbe Eliezer. Do not confuse Rebbe Eliezer here. Rebbe Eliezer was the last Mishnah. Rebbe El-Ozer in this Mishnah holds like Rebbe Yoshua. If you go down to the bottom of the page, the Ikam Mefarshim on page 33, Rebbe Elazar. L'cha'ora nira shadas Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua b'Mishnah Seinu kurdas Rebbe Yeshua b'Mishnah Zayin shahadvorim heinam l'kachim izber udalo k'Rebbe Elazar. It just basically says what we just said. Rebbe Elazar of this Mishnah is like Rebbe Yehoshua of the previous Mishnah, that when a person says Hegdish, he wants it to go to the Mizbeach. So his flour, his oil, and his wine is going to be sold for people who need these things to bring in the Beis HaMikdash. The proceeds are going to be used to buy male animals to bring a korban olah. This is exactly Rebbe Yoshua, and we don't paskin like Rebbe Yoshua. As we said, we paskin like Rebbe Eliezer. Mishnah Tes. This Mishnah is going to open us up to a whole sugya, which is not really a sugya of Maktas HaShekel either, although it deals with what was bought with the Maktas HaShekel. Notwithstanding that, we're going to go into this Mishnah a little today. We're going to start Perek Hey Bli Neder today. We've been looking forward to doing Perek Hey for a while. Perek Hey has the names of the 15 supervisors. We spoke a lot about them in Masechta Midos and Masechta Talmud. We're going to take a look at the names of all 15. We're going to take a look at Mishnah Tes now, notwithstanding the fact that it's not 100% on point with the issue of Maktas HaShekel. We're going to go into it more deeply tomorrow, because around this whole sugya in Perek Daled Mishnah Tes is a sugya in Masechta Bava Metzia, and surrounding that sugya, that subject in Bava Metzia, is an entire sugya about Rosh Hashanah. So everything is Hashgacha Pratis, everything comes in its time, Hakol Ba B'Zman. So we're going to learn Mishnah Tes today with some background information. Then we'll go to Perek Hey and learn Mishnah Aleph, the 15 names of our supervisors. And then Bli Neder, we're going to come back tomorrow and look more deeply at Mishnah Tes, Gemara and Bava Metzia, and the whole sugya about this that's relevant to Rosh Hashanah. Perek Daled Mishnah Tes, page 33. Achas l'shloshim yom. There are two different ways to learn this Mishnah, and the way I'm learning it is really the simple explanation of the Mishnah. Every 30 days, misharin es halishka, we examine, or better yet, we reassess what is going on in the treasury. What does that mean? We know that from the Maktas HaShekel, they took out money, right? Everybody remembers this. Took out money, withdrawal from Maktas HaShekel, which is called Trumas Halishka. We had Trumas Halishka on the first day of Nisan, 15 days before Shavuos, 15 days before Sukkot. After the Trumas Halishka was taken, a blanket, a mat, a hide was put on top of that money. That money then became Shiore Lishka, the leftovers. And then money came in between Pesach and Shavuos, went on top of the mat. That money was, box was taken that held 3 sa'ah, and that was box bays. We went through this. So we know that money's been withdrawn. Let's take an example. Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, the person goes into the Lishka, fills up the box that has the letter Aleph on it and comes out. And from this money, they're going to start buying korbanos and whatever else you're allowed to buy from the Trumas Halishka that we learned about in the Mishnah. And they're going to go ahead into the marketplace and buy it. They didn't go every single day into the market and buy ketoris. A little ketoris for today and a little ketoris for tomorrow. They bought it in, let us say, for purposes of what we're dealing with, they bought it for the whole year. And that's basically the way the Rav learns. If you take a look at the second Rav, on page 33, right-hand side, where the lines get wide, you see, he said 5 lines. They made yearly deals. So let's take a simple case. The person went into the treasury, took out the box on Rosh Chodesh Nisan of money, Machzis HaShekel. He goes into the marketplace and he makes a deal with a person that you're going to, he's negotiating in the marketplace. He tries to get the best deal for Hegdish. And he says, I need X amount of ketores. Sorry, let's leave ketores out. Let's take an easy case. I need X amount of oil for the coming year. Or maybe let's take a case even easier. I need the following amount of flour. We're going to call it 10 pounds. I need 10 pounds of flour for the Beis HaMikdash for the coming year. What's the best price you can give me for a year's worth of flour? 10 pounds. So the Mishnah says, every 30 days, they would reassess what's going on in the treasury. What does that mean? Call them a kabel of l'sapek slosos. Slosos is flour. Anyone, the marketplace, the seller, accepted upon himself the following deal. Me'arba. For a seller, we're going to, $1 a pound. I am going to give you $1 a pound deal. You want 10 pounds? Going to be $10. I will supply the Beis HaMikdash with flour for this year. You say you need 10 pounds. I'm going to charge you $1 a pound. Okay. Amdu misholosh. As it turns out, the year continues going, and the price of flour increases to the point that the marketplace now, what used to be $1, you were able to get 4 pounds. So you were able to get 4 pounds of flour. Now, for $1, you can only get 3 pounds of flour. There's an increase in the price of flour. So now what do? We have a deal. And the deal was, I'm going to pay you $10 for 10 pounds. Whatever numbers you want to use are immaterial. I'm just using it as an example. The deal was made 10 pounds for $1. As the year goes on, the price of flour increases, so that when the deal was made given a certain market price, and the deal was made given that market price of flour. I'm willing to supply you with 10 pounds of flour at the given rate. The price of flour increases. What happens? Yisapik me'arba. That's irrelevant when it comes to Hegdish. He still must supply the amount of flour that he agreed to supply when the deal was made. So when the deal was made, he agreed to give 10 pounds of flour for $1 a pound, means $10. And now $10 only buys 8 pounds of flour. It's irrelevant to Hegdish. He still has to supply 10 pounds for $10. And he's going to absorb the loss. Why? So this is where we're going to have a little introduction to Masech Bab Metzia in Perek Gimel, Perek Dalet. The first Mishnah in Bab Metzia, the Perek is called Hazah. And the introduction to this is something that most of us are not familiar with unless you learn Hilchas Kinyan, specifically Hazah in Bab Metzia. There's something called in Halacha Kinyan. You have to actually consummate the purchase of an object, the sale of an object. Cash is not relevant except in certain items. So let's take a vacuum case. And that's the case of the Mishnah. Ruvain, so we don't get confused between Ruvain and Shimon, which sometimes is confusing. Ruvain goes over to Zavulun. Zavulun is, he sells apples. He grows apples and he sells apples. Ruvain goes over to Zavulun and says, Zavulun, I would like 10 pounds of apples. And Zavulun says, fine, 10 pounds of apples, $100. Okay. Ruvain gives Zavulun the $100. And Ruvain says, I'm going to go get my truck. It'll take me an hour or two to get my truck. I'm coming by and I'll pick up the apples. In the meantime, here's the $100 for the apples. Ruvain leaves to go get his truck. Shimon shows up. Shimon says to Zavulun, Zavulun, I'd like 10 pounds of apples. And Zavulun says, you know what? I have 10 pounds of apples, but my 10 pounds of apples are $125. So Shimon says, sure, okay. And Shimon takes the apples. He literally takes the apples in his truck, puts them in his truck, and drives off. Reuven comes back 2 hours later with his truck, and he wants 10 pounds of apples. And Zavulun says, really sorry about that. I gave the apples to Shimon. Shimon gave me $120, and I gave him the apples. He already took them. And Reuven jumping up and down and saying, what are you talking about? I was here hours ago. I gave you $100 cash for the apples. What's going on? They're my apples. What's going to happen here is Reuven is going to take Zavulun to Beis Din and say, well, obviously, Zavulun's going to give back Reuven his $100. But Reuven doesn't want his $100 back. Reuven wants his 10 pounds of apples. So Reuven's going to take Zavulun to Beis Din. Beis Din is going to paskin, first step, that Zavulun wins. Why? Because what Reuven gave Zavulun was cash. Cash is a very nice thing, but it doesn't complete the kinyan. The transfer of ownership of the apples never happened. Transferring ownership from one person to another person requires a kinyan. Animals have one kind of kinyan. Metaltalin have another kind of kinyan. If you want to purchase real estate, it has a different kind of kinyan. You can give a person $1 million. I'm talking without the contract issue and the issues of minik hamokim and all those kind of issues that come up today. In the pure, simple vacuum case, a person agrees with someone that I'm going to buy your field. He gives him $1,000 for the field and then walks out, doesn't do anything, doesn't put up a fence, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do any kinyan. Reuven does not own that field. And that has all kinds of ramifications. If I don't own the field, then if the field burns down, who loses? The seller. I gave the seller $1,000. The field burned down. The seller is going to have to give me back my $1,000. And he is the one that's going to take the loss for the burned field because it never transferred to Reuven. There's a difference between money and transferring of ownership. Transferring of ownership actually means going from seller to purchaser, which doesn't necessarily happen by giving money. And this is true lahavdil in secular law as well. There's something called risk of loss, and this happens, especially happens, when people buy and sell houses. The buyer is buying the house, the seller is selling the house, and you give the buyer gives the seller a down payment, and you're going to close in 60 days. During that 60 days, when the buyer is given the down payment, he's not given the rest of the money, and the house burns down. Whose loss is that? Well, let's assume there's no insurance. Whose loss is that during this twilight zone period? The property's been sold, the contract's been signed, down payment's been given, but there's no transfer of ownership. The deed has not been recorded anywhere. As far as everyone's concerned, it belongs to the seller. That's called the risk of loss issue in the secular law. And that's why in the contracts in sale, there's usually risk of loss provisions. And usually we have insurance and who is the insurance for, etc. This becomes the risk of loss issue. Leaving the risk of loss issue aside, in halacha, you need a transfer of ownership on the sale. Transfer of ownership means that you have to make a kinyan. And a kinyan, that's the perek hazov. So in our case, Reuven is jumping up and down in Beis and saying, I was there first. I gave Zevulun $100. Where's my apples? I want 10 pounds of apples for $100. And Zevulun says, here's your $100 back. I'm done, because you never made a kinyan. You looked at the apples, you gave me $100, you left and said you're coming back with your truck. Shimon, who came 2 hours later, came with his truck, pulled the apples off my property, put the apples in his truck. He is the rightful owner. And Beis Din will say that's correct. Zvulun, give back Reuven his $100. The real owner of the 10 pounds of apples is Shimon. But now Beis Din is going to say the following. And this is the Mishnah in Bava Metzia on Daf Mem Daled. Nasan loy mois, a person gave, Reuven gave Zvulun money for fruit, velo moshach, and Reuven did not pull the fruit, whatever moshach means. There's something called kinyan mashiach. He didn't make the transfer of ownership. He didn't pull the boxes of fruit from Reuven, from Zvulun. Yocholach zabay. Zvulun can retract. He can say the deal's off. I know you gave me $100, but I'm not selling it to you. I'm finished because you never made a kinyan. Here's your money back. Aval Amru, however, while Zvulun's going to give Reuven back his $100, Reuven's not going to get the fruit. Shimon will keep the fruit. Beis Din's going to do something amazing. They're going to say to Zvulun, what you should really do, Zvulun, is get 10 pounds of fruit in the marketplace and give it to Reuven. After all, you had a deal, a verbal deal. And this is key, verbal. You had a verbal deal by which you were going to give 10 pounds of apples to Reuven for $100. Now you, Zvulun, go into the marketplace and get 10 pounds of apples and give it to Reuven as you promised. And Zvulun says, well, I can't do that because the market price for apples is now $120. And Reuven only gave me $100. So that's all I'm willing to do is give Reuven back his $100, but I'm not going to pay an extra $20 so that Reuven can get his apples. And in truth, he really should do that, Zvulun, because he got $120 from Shimon. He should take the $120 he got from Shimon, go into the marketplace, take that $120, buy 10 pounds of apples, give Reuven his 10 pounds of apples, and what will then happen? Reuven will get his 10 pounds of apples for $100. Shimon has his 10 pounds of apples for $120. And Reuven and Zvulun ended up selling 10 pounds of apples for $100. That's the way the story should really end. Zevulun should take the 120 he got from Shimon, go into the marketplace, buy 10 pounds of apples, give it to Reuven, Vizehu, and that's all Reuven will end up with is $100. But he doesn't want to do that. He says, listen, this deal is over. Reuven got his $100 back. Shimon has his 10 pounds of apples. I have $120. That's where this deal ends. And Basin says, you're right. That's where it'll end. But we wanted you to know something. Avol Amru, Mi Shepara, Me Anshe Dor Hamabu Umidor Hafloga, the God who punished the generation of the Mabul and punished the generation of the Tower of Babylon, we call it, who asidli para mimi she'ena oimet b'diburei. You should know that the God who punished the Dor Hamabul and the Dor who punished the Dor Hafloga, he punishes those people who don't keep their word. So Gemara has a whole question on Daf Mem Dalet Amud Beis. I'm sorry. The Mishnah is on Mem Dalet Amud Aleph. And the Gemara is on Mem Ches on the base. The Gemara is machlekes there where the Beis is actually cursing Zevulun or just warning him. It sounds like a curse. Reuven, Zevulun, you didn't keep your word. You promised Reuven 10 pounds of apples for $100, and it's true. In the law of Kinyan, you're right. In the laws of pure Kinyan, you were allowed to sell it to Zevulun for $120, and therefore you don't have to do anything except give back Reuven his $100. But we want you to know, while in Choshen Mishpat you win, and you don't have to do anything here other than give Reuven back his $100. But the God who punished the Dor Hamabul, and the same God who punished the Dor Haflaga, he punishes people who don't keep their word. And with that, the Torah ends. So either Zevulun ended up getting cursed by Basin, or getting a very stern warning of Basin. Either way, we have this concept of kinyan. Nothing belongs. There's not a transfer of ownership until there is kinyan. That's the introduction. We're going to go more into this tomorrow around this inyan of keeping your word and why you need to keep your word. We're going to take a look at tomorrow. It's a whole sugya that Rav Hutner develops in the Pachad Yitzhak on Rosh Hashanah. So now we have a little difficulty with the Mishnah we just read. Page 33, Tes. Achas l'shloshim yom, once every 30 days. Let's put the every 30 days in brackets for now. Misharin es halishka. They have to reassess what's going on with the Maktas HaShekel that was used from the Lishka. What happened? At some point, a withdrawal was made, first day of Nisan, and the person went into the marketplace. I know there's this question coming up, it came up before. Who goes into the marketplace? How many people do you need? You need 2 people, 3 people. You can't spend money of hektish unless you have 2 people. The question came up on the screen last week. Again, I say, everyone be patient. These are issues that the Mishnah will discuss in the next parak. So we have to reassess what's going on with the Lishka. The Treasury has bought certain things in the market, meaning it has made certain deals in the market, and now we have to reassess where these deals are. So in the first case, the person went into the marketplace and negotiated a deal. He said, are you willing to supply the Beis Hamikdash with flour for the whole year? And the person says, yes, and what I'm willing to do is I'm willing to give the Beis Hamikdash 4 pounds of, let's use the Mishnah's number, 4 pounds of 4 pounds of flour for $1. Okay, and the person agrees 4 pounds for $1. And that's the deal for the rest of the year. What's the problem here? There's no kinyan. Even if the person, the gizbar, gives the person $1, he gives him $2 for 8 pounds. He gives him $3 for 3 pounds. I'm sorry, he gives him $1 for 4 pounds. He gives him $2 for 8 pounds. He gives him $3 for 12 pounds. Unless he takes all 12 pounds with him and makes a kinyan, there's no kinyan here. That's all that's happened right now is we're making a deal. For $1, I will supply the Beis Hamikdash throughout the year with 4 pounds of flour. $1 for every 4 pounds during the year. Amdu mishalosh. And based in the Beis Hamikdash, the Gizbar reassesses his deal, and he sees that in the marketplace now, $1 buys only 3 pounds of flour. What would the rule be if it's not the Beis Hamikdash? That's all the buyer gets is 3 pounds for $1. He doesn't own 4 pounds for $1. That's all they did was they agreed that that would be the going forward price, but no kinyan was actually made. So therefore, in the standard rules of kinyan, if the price went from $1 for 4 pounds to $1 for 3 pounds, that's it. Going forward, you only get 3 pounds for $1. If you wanted the original deal, you should have taken all the flour the day we made the deal, 20 pounds, 100 pounds, and paid me for it. That would have been the end of the deal. But that's not what we did. We just agreed verbally on a deal, and you only took X amount, and now the market price changed. You don't have no kinyan on what you want today. What you want today is going to be $1 for 3 pounds. Yisapik me'ar. Nevertheless, you're going to have to, the seller is going to have to give hektish, continue with the original deal, 4.4 pounds for $1. If you take a look at the Rav, 2 lines from the bottom, in the middle of the line, the Rav tells us why. The hektish kone bekesef. It's a new rule. Transfer of ownership for hektish, unlike the Mishnah we just learned about, where money does not transfer ownership, you must make a physical kinyan. Hektish is different. Once hektish pays you for something, you have bought that. And that's it. It's not just a verbal deal that needs a kinyan. The kesef results in a transfer of ownership. We learned this from a pasuk that once hektish gives money, it owns. V'im kibul. Okay, so that's the first case. The market price went up, and the seller needs to maintain his original deal, 4 pounds for $1, even if the market now is 3 pounds for $1, you continue giving hektish 4 pounds for $1. What happens if it's the opposite case? Mishalosh. At the time of the original deal, hektish agreed, for $1 I get 3 pounds of flour. The price of flour went down. Now you can get for $1 4 pounds of flour. So if we're going to be consistent with the first rule of the Mishnah that hektish acquires and there's a transfer of ownership immediately, so in the first case, hektish benefited. For $1 I'm going to get 4 pounds. The price went $1 only 3 pounds, but I'm hektish. I still get 4 pounds for $1 because kesef is konen. So then the flip case, to be consistent, if the deal was $1 for 3 pounds and then the price went down and it became $1 for 4 pounds, hektish should be bound by the original deal because the transfer of ownership is $1 for 3 pounds, and hektish should not get the 4th pound. Nevertheless, hektish is going to get the benefit and is going to win here too. Yisapik me'arba. You're going to give hektish 4. Why? Because hektish can never be less than the average guy on the street. The average guy on the street, if he went into the marketplace he gave $1, he would get 4 pounds. The gizbar cannot walk into the marketplace with $1 and be told you're only getting 3 because we made the deal a couple of months ago was 1 for 3. You cannot put Hegdish at any time in a worse position than the average person who walks in to buy something. So the Mishnah says the rule, Sheyad Hegdish al ha'elyoina. Hegdish, the purchasing hand of Hegdish is always going to win. If the price of flour goes up, and therefore from 4 pounds for $1, it goes to 3 pounds for $1, Hegdish is still going to get 4 pounds because we learned that out from a pasuk, the kesef is kona. If the price goes down, the deal was $1 for 3 pounds, and now it's $1 for 4 pounds, Hegdish is still going to get the 4 pounds, even though it made a deal for $1 for 3 pounds, because it cannot be worse than the average person, and that's the rule. Yad Hegdish al ha'elyona, and this is known. So this is not a surprise, okay? People who are in the marketplace and the gizbar, the person in charge for purchasing, comes into the marketplace and says, I want to buy flour for Hegdish. This is not a shock or surprise. The people in the marketplace know they're taking the risk. The price goes up, the price goes down, whatever happens, I am going to be at the short end. The question is, do you want to make this deal with Hegdish? Hegdish is usually a pretty good deal. There's a lot of money stored up in the Beis HaMikdash and the Lishka. Quote unquote, Hegdish is good for its money. So there are people that are willing to make a deal where you know you're going to be paid, even if you take the risk of a fluctuating market. The price goes up, the price goes down. But I have Hegdish, it's a commitment. They're good for their money. They're going to pay on time. People are willing to do it. So it's not a shock that suddenly Hegdish is taking advantage of anybody. This is a well-known rule. The gizbar comes into the marketplace and says, I'm buying for the Beis HaMikdash. We all know what the rules here are. Do you want to sell? Now the Mishnah goes to the next case. Vim hisliya soles, hisliya lo. This is very, very interesting. This is the next step. The gizbar goes into the marketplace. They agree on a deal. $1 for 4 pounds. And that's going to be the deal for the year. Every time I need flour, the gizbar says, I'm coming to you. You're giving me 4 pounds. I'm giving you $1. The gizbar goes into marketplace. He gives a person $1. And he takes 4 pounds of flour. Now the gizbar has taken physical control of the flour and brought it to the Beis HaMikdash. Take a look at the Rav left side of the page at the top. Hisliya lo. Afilu Moshe HaGizbar v'nosamois. Even if the gizbar went into the marketplace and was Moshe, he pulled it. He took the flour and he paid for it. Alle gute Sachen. He gave the money to the seller. $1 for 4 pounds. And he took the 4 pounds. Hisliya. And later, the flour becomes ruined, rotten, wormy. Mishnah says, hisliya lo. The seller has to replace the flour. Vim hechmetz, we'll see why. Vim hechmetz yayin. Gizbar made a deal. A gallon of wine for $1. For the rest of the year, whenever I need wine, you are my man in the marketplace. I come to you with $1, you give me 4 gallons of wine. I give you $1, give me 4 gallons of wine. You're the man. He comes into the marketplace, says, here's $1, I need the next 4 gallons of wine. The seller gives him the 4 gallons of wine. He gives him the $1. And he takes the 4 gallons of wine to the Beis HaMikdash. And before they actually use the wine on the Mizbeach, it turns sour, it turns into vinegar. The seller has to replace the wine. Here you have a case where money's exchanged hands. The wine's been given to the gizbar. The flour's been given to the gizbar. And still it went bad. The seller is going to have to replace it. Why? Because in the case of Hegdish, the seller doesn't really own or earn the money he was paid by the gizbar until it's the material, the flour or the wine is actually used on the mizbeach. When it's used on the mizbeach, that's when the seller can fully earn his money. For those who do bookkeeping or accounting, this is similar to an accounts receivable to cash. Except in the case of the secular accounts receivable, a person sells a car and he's going to get money in a month. So he puts $100 on his balance sheet in accounts receivable because he didn't get the money. He gets the money, he's going to cancel the accounts receivable and he's going to put it into cash. In the case of the Beis Hamikdash, if you sell the Beis Hamikdash flour, oil, or any of these kind of items, and the Gizber actually takes it to the Beis Hamikdash, the seller in the marketplace, if he's doing bookkeeping, he should not convert the money he received to cash. It remains in accounts receivable until he knows that what he gave Hegdish, flour, wine, oil, was used on the Mizbeach. That's the din. They all know this. The seller does not fully earn his money. And now we go back lahavdil to risk of loss. The seller has the risk of loss, and he understands this. The flour, the oil, the wine that he gave to the Gizbar, and he already got money for, and everything seems perfect. The Gizbar comes back to the market and says, I have some news for you. The flour became wormy. The oil went sour. 4 more gallons of wine, please. Another 4 pounds of flour, and the seller will have to replace it because he doesn't fully earn the money until it's used in the Beis Hamikdash. So the Beis Hamikdash is known in the marketplace as Yodo Alha Elyona. Its hand has above everything else. So if there's a change in marketplace price, Hegdish wins. If the materials that Hegdish purchased and actually took go bad, the seller has to replace them. Risk of loss is on seller. This is not a shock. This is not taking advantage of anybody. This is a marketplace rule that everybody is aware of, and you can choose either to do business with Hegdish or not do business with Hegdish. The Gizbar doesn't come to someone in the marketplace and say, I am taking your wine at $1 for 4 gallons, whether you like it or not. That's not how it works. You go to the marketplace, it's a willing seller. You don't want to, you don't have to. But if you do business with Hegdish, these are the rules. Everybody knows the rules. Okay. We're going to come back to this idea of Kinyan, and this idea in the Mishnah Bab Metzia we saw about how important it is to keep your word. Now in Chosh and Mishpat, you may win the Din Torah, as we said. Zavulun will walk away, and he will not have to do anything for Reuven except give him back his $100. He will not have to give him 10 pounds of apples, but he's going to get that, whether it's a curse or warning from Beis Din, the God who punished the Dor HaMabul and the God who punished the Dor HaMabul and the Dor HaFloga, he punishes people who don't keep their word. We'll take a look at Rashi Blined tomorrow. I'll scan the little piece of Gemara with the Rashi and a Pachad Yitzchak about how critical this idea is when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, about what emes is, what truth means. In fact, in Shemona Esrei, on Rosh Hashanah, we say, Ki ato Elokim emes, udvorcha emes, v'kayim lo'ad. Rebbeinu Shalom, you are a true God, and your word is true. And this is part of this is the Seif Bracha of the middle Bracha in Rosh Hashanah. We emphasize God's truth and how God keeps his word. And this is a sugya in Rosh Hashanah. We'll take a look at Bli Neder tomorrow. If the goods are not for Hektish, we explained the rule. If the goods are not Hektish, the rule is the transfer of ownership only occurs when there's a Kinyan. So we gave the case of Reuven, Shimon, and Zebulun. Reuven paid for the fruit but didn't take them. They don't belong to Reuven. they still belong to Zevulun, and therefore Zevulun can sell it to Shimon. Is it a nice thing to do? No. Will Zevulun win the Din Torah? He will win the Din Torah, but he's going to get what we call a Misha Pora. Right? After you get an Aliyah in Shul, you get a Misha Beirach. The one who blesses should bless you. Beis Din also had a Misha Pora. The one who punishes should punish you. So that's what happens if it's not Hegdish. What is not what they raise a pen and keep it? Yes, the reason that they raise a pen or a keeper when you sell chametz or the ksuba, that is called the kinyan that's made. That's called, whether it's there's something called kinyan chalipin, kinyan sudar. There are all kinds of kinyanim, and that's why these things are done to pick up a pen or a keeper. That's a kinyan. That makes a binding. You sell your chametz. The person who's buying, he doesn't buy the chametz. The person who you designate to be your shliach to sell the chametz is going to give you his pen or his keeper to lift up, and that is the kinyan that's made to designate him as, quote unquote, the designee to sell your chametz. So that's a perfect example of of kinyan. Okay, we've all been waiting so long to find out who our 15 supervisors are. Who are our 15 supervisors in the Beis HaMikdash? So we're going to read it quickly. And for those who want to memorize them, there's a chart on page 36 at the bottom of the page. You have the 15 supervisors. Now there's a machlokes what the names here mean. We talked about this when we learned Maseches Midos and Tamid. One explanation to these names is that, and that's the explanation we're going to use, that these 15 people actually lived at different times. This is not in one generation. These were the 15 supervisors of the Beis HaMikdash. These are 15 people who at one time or another were the supervisors of the Beis HaMikdash over a given activity. And because they were tzaddikim, or because of the efficiency with which they did their job, whoever took over their job was given that name. So Lahavdil Elef Alfei Abdolos, whoever became king of Mitzrayim was called Paro. So here, whoever became the person who woke up the Kohanim in the morning, so he would be called, we learned about him Masech the Tamid, Gabini Cruz, Gabini the announcer. There was a tzaddik who was the announcer, who woke up the Kohanim in the morning. And remember, it's one of the miracles when he shouted out, Kohanim, get up. They heard him in Yericho. His name was Gabini Cruz, Gabini the announcer. After Gabini died, whoever took his position, they called him Gabini in honor of the Gabini Cruz. So that's how we learn the Mishnah. There are 15 names here. Each of these people lived in different generations. Maybe some of them lived in the same generation, but all 15 did not live in the same generation. And because they did the particular job they were given so well, and they were tzaddikim, whoever took their job got that name. So Mishnah now says, Elohim hamamunim shei b'mikdash. These are the supervisors in the Beis HaMikdash. Yochanan ben Pinchas al hachosamos. Yochanan ben Pinchas was in charge of the chosamos. We learned about this in Masechta Midos and Tamid. Somebody came to the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to learn more about this later in the Masechta. On page 38, Mishnah, this Perek Hey Mishnah Gimel, different size animals, depending upon what kind of animal you brought as a korban. If it was a bigger animal, it needed more flour, more wine. A smaller animal, less flour, less wine. All these measurements are given in the Torah. So a person walks into the Beis HaMikdash with his animal, and he needs flour, assuming he has to, not every private korban needs a mincha. He's bringing his korban shlomen. He needs a mincha, he needs flour, he needs oil, he needs wine. How much oil, how much flour, how much wine does he need? So he goes to a room where Pinchas al HaChosamos was. Pinchas Chosamos means receipts. You would walk in there and say, today I'm bringing a sheep as my korban. How much oil, flour, and wine do I need? He knew. And he would give you a receipt. And the receipt will soon, not today, we'll see later in this perek what kind of receipt he gave. He gave you a receipt that basically said, this person has purchased X amount of wine, X amount of flour, X amount of oil. You paid him, you got the receipt. That's what his job was, supervisor number one. That's the checkout counter. That's where you got a receipt. But you don't have the oil, the flour, or the wine yet. You only have a receipt that you've purchased it. Achia al hanasachim. You went to another room, and assuming that there was another room, there was a person who was the supervisor to actually give out the wine, the flour, and the oil. And this was split up so that there was a check and balance on the money coming into the Beis HaMikdash. The person you gave money, he gave receipts. The receipts went to a different person who then gave the flour, the oil, and the oil, and the wine. That was Achia, number two. Matisyo ben Shmuel al HaPiyasov. Now we find out who was in charge of the pious. Pious number one, lottery one winner, Trumas Hadeshin. Lottery number two, 13 winners that deal with bringing the korban, cleaning the menorah, cleaning the Mizbeach HaTorah, bringing the animal parts to the ramp, bringing the oil, the flour, the wine to the ramp. Lottery three, Ketores, only people who never brought Ketores. Lottery number four, the way we learned and the way we hold, which Kohen or Kohanim will now bring the animal parts from the ramp up to the Mizbeach to be consumed on the Mizbeach. Who was the person in charge of the lottery system? Matisyahu ben Shmuel. Psachya al-Hakinim. Psachya was in charge of the Kinim. Kinim means that there were certain people who had to bring birds to the Beis HaMikdash as their korban. Azav, Yoledes, a woman who is an example, a woman who gave birth, she's Tameh, and part of her process is to bring birds to the Beis HaMikdash. This is a very complicated sugya, Kinim. It's one of the most complicated sugyas in all of Shas. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Kinim upischei nida. Kinim and the laws of nida are two of the most difficult subjects in all of Shas. So if you take a look at picture 38, you have the collection box. The collection box means a woman came to the Beis HaMikdash as an example, and she put money into this box, and the money in the box was to pay for birds. And they would ask her, what are you doing? Can't you would say, either I'm a zava or I'm a yeledes, whatever the case is. Then the person who's in charge of this money would go to the place in the Beis HaMikdash and get two birds, and these two birds would be offered for this woman. Who is in charge of this process? I'm saying this very simplistically. Person by name of Psachya. And who is Psachya? Zeh Mordechai. That's Mordechai. Now we know that Mordechai, the Mordechai of the Nes of Purim, lived at the end of the 70 years between the Churban Bayis Rishon and the building of Bayis Sheni. So there was, the all probability is that we're talking about Mordechai at the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, and Mordechai was the person in charge of this kuppah, this shofar, this collection. Because of the complexity of the halachas of Kenan, they put him in charge of the box that deals with these bird offerings. Zeh Mordechai. Lama nikra shmo Psachya. Why did they give Mordechai the name Psachya? What does the word Psachya mean? The word Psachya means from the word Pesach, an opening. Shehaya posech b'dvorim. He would be able to open up words, v'darshan, and explain them. The Gemara in Menachos gives examples. women, sometimes men, would come to the Beis Hamikdash and would not be clear about what they need. Or they would be talking a foreign language. Remember, the Jews who came back from Bavel for the second Beis Hamikdash, and many of them only spoke Aramaic. Mordechai, because he understood 70 languages, which we know from, he was a member of the Sanhedrin. We know this from the story in the Megillah with Bigsan and Seresh. They were talking about how to assassinate Achashverosh, and they weren't worried about talking in front of Mordechai because Mordechai was a Jew and they didn't know he understood so many languages. So he was posech b'dvarim, he was able to open up words, v'dorshim, and explain them. V'yodea shivam loshin, he knew all 70 languages. So therefore, because Kenan is such a complicated sugya, and if you take a look in the Iketos V'Syantav, page 35, the left-hand page of your Mishnayos, the second line v'dorshim, brings down the Gemara we just mentioned in Menachos Daf Samach Daled, and brings down the story in the Gemara that different people would come in and say things in sort of language that you couldn't understand. And Mordechai, somebody would have to understand what these people are saying. Why do they need two birds? Is it to be because of a zava or because of Yoledes? And he understood, he was able to understand what they were trying to communicate. So that's why they called him Psachia. Ben Achia al Chole Me'ayin. Ben Achia was the stomach doctor. He was one of the 15 supervisors, and his job was to be the stomach doctor. Why do you need a stomach doctor in the Beis Hamikdash? So if you take a look in the Rabbeinu Ovadia on the right side of your page, Al Chole Me'ayin. Lafi Shakohanim Holchin Yechev Malaritzba. We learned the Masechta Midas and Masechta Tamid. Kohanim walked barefoot in the Beis Hamikdash on the marble floor because there can't be a chatzitza. It can't be anything separating their body from the floor of the Beis Hamikdash because the floor of the Beis Hamikdash is also holy. The same way a Kohen can't wear gloves while he's doing avoda, he can't wear anything on his foot that would separate his foot from the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. So the floor of the Beis Hamikdash is basically cold. It's marble. So you have a cold body. And that's why, if you remember, there's a fire in the Beis Hamoked. We learned about Beis Hamoked. So the Kohanim can go in there and warm themselves up. So basically, the Kohanim are walking around part of the day and they're cold. But Ochlin Basar Habe, Vishos Semayim. And Kohanim are eating meat during the day and they're drinking water. So this is not a very good combination for your stomach, having the shivers, eating meat, and drinking water. They would have stomach issues, the Kohanim. They need to push a stomach doctor available in the Beis Hamikdash to help them along with their stomach issues. So he's a supervisor as well. Nechunya was a supervisor. He was the one in charge of digging wells. This is specifically for the Olei Regalim. They needed a lot of wells. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews came to the Beis Hamikdash, especially around the Shalosh Regalim. And Jews were always coming to Yerushalayim, and they needed a person in charge to make sure that the wells are maintained and the wells are filled with water, etc. And that's Nechunya. Gabini Karoz. Baruch Hashem, on page 35, we have Gabini. Gabini, the announcer, who wakes up the Kohanim every morning. Ben Gever al Ne'ilah Sha'arim. Ben Gever was the one in charge of opening and closing the gates. Ben, now we call him Ben Bibi. Here it's printed as Ben Bevoy. We learned about him in the first parak of Midos. The Kohanim guarded the Beis Hamikdash in 3 places and the Leviim in 21 places. And there was a supervisor who walked around at night to see, to make sure that all the shomim were awake. And if this supervisor found one of the shomim asleep, there's a process by which he whipped him. He had permission to burn his clothing. And we learned this in Masechta Midos. And we learned about it was Ben Bibi. Now we had it, Ben Beiboy or Ben Bibi al HaPakiach. He was in charge of the whip. We learned the next person, Masechta Tamid. At the end of Masechta Tamid, we learned about how the Leviim sang Shira. We learned that there was a Kohen, Ben Arza al Hatzil Tzol. Ben Arza was the one in charge of the Tzil Tzol, the cymbals. He was the one that gave off that sound, and the Levium knew it was time to sing Shira. Hugras ben Levi al Ashir. Okay. Okay, so Ben Arza was in charge of that symbol, and Hugras ben Levi was in charge of the shir. He was in charge of actually singing. When he started singing, the Levium sang. When he stopped, the Levium finished singing. Beit Garmu al Maisalech Maponim. The house or the family of Garmu, they were in charge of baking the Lechem Haponim, 12 challahs every week. They were baked on Erev Shabbos, and they were put on the shulchan on Shabbos afternoon. The challah from the week before was taken off of the shulchan and given to the Kohanim to eat. 12 new challahs that were baked on Friday were then put Shabbos afternoon on the shulchan when last week's challahs were taken off. And we all know about the famous miracle with the challah, the lechem haponim. It was baked on Friday, and when they took it off the table 9 days later, if today is Friday, we baked it today, we put it on the shulchan tomorrow afternoon, and the following Shabbos, which is 9 days later, the challahs were taken off, and they were still smoking as if they came out of the oven. What does this lechem haponim look like? Nothing like we can imagine. There's a machlokas exactly what it looked like, but one form is on page 37, picture 40. You have a picture of what the lechem haponim looked like. Nothing like we think a challah looks like. It was sort of a box that was open on both sides and open at the top. So Beis Garmu were the specialists on how to make this challah. It was not easy to make that challah, and especially not easy to make sure when you pull it off of the place where you bake it that it didn't fall apart into pieces. So it was a special kind of baking, and they were the ones that knew how to do this, and they taught other people how to do it. And anyone who became in charge of lechem haponim was called Beis Garmu. That's the way we learned the Mishnah. Beis Avtinas al Ma'aseh HaKetoros. The family of Avtinas was in charge of putting together the ketores from all the different ingredients. They made the ketores. And we know that there was a place called Beis Avtinas in the Beis Hamikdash of Oisai, Masech the Midas, southern wall of the Azorah. There was it was like we called it second floor attic, was the Beis Avtinas, and that's where the ketores was made, and that's where they taught the Kohen Gadol how to do the ketores on Yom Kippur. Elazar al HaParochos. Elazar is in charge, not Eliezer. Elazar is in charge. Eliezer is in charge of something else. Eliezer keeps the shir going. But Elazar was in charge of the curtains. There were many curtains in the Beis Hamikdash. We always think about one curtain in the Beis Hamikdash, the one that separated the Kodesh from the Kodesh Kodashim. We're going to learn about in the next perek, page 41, that there were more than that. There were many parochas in the Beis Hamikdash, and Elazar was in charge of all the curtains. Some of them had to be maintained, some of them had to be made new, some of them had to be clean. He was in charge. And we've learned about the next person, who Pinchas al Hamalbush, Pinchas Hamalbush. Remember, you go up the 15 steps of Shar Nicanor. Our Midas diagram 3. You walk up the 15 steps of Shar Nicanor. On the right side, it says Lishkas Pinchas Hamalbush, the room of Pinchas, who was in charge of the Kohen's clothing. On the left side was Lishkas Oisei Chavitin, the room where they made the 12 challahs. Has nothing to do with lechem haponim. These are the 12 challahs that the Kohen Gadol brought every day, 6 in the morning, 6 in the afternoon. But on the right side of Shar Nicanor is Pinchas Hamalbush. And Pinchas is our 15th supervisor. And if you want to see the chart is on page 36 at the bottom, the name of all 15 and what he was in charge of. And those are our supervisors. So that leaves us now at Perek Hey, Mishnah Beis. We're going to come back tomorrow to talk about this inyan of kinyan and the inyan of a person keeping his word and what that means for Rosh Hashanah. There was at least one person last week that raised the issue of how do you spend the money? How many people are allowed to spend money? Can one person go into the marketplace and buy things? That's the next Mishnah on page 37. How many people do you need to spend money of Hegdish?